that you cannot be innovative without being creative. So these things are all the same. All of this work requires radical imagination, which is what all of us are here gathered to celebrate.
And when we talk about the radical innovation, I think the conversation a few of us had also been having is who are we and who are we trying to be as Africans? So we're all innovating. I assume we all want to make a buck, and that's important. But there's also this big question about this African narrative and who we are and who we are being. And a very important part of that is in our creativity, in our imagination, in who we are, in who we think we are, in who we think we're becoming. And so we think this evening will be a real opportunity for us to engage perhaps in that side of the thinking and the conversation.
And so we have an incredible panel here, an incredible and robust panel here of diverse creatives who are representing the arts in so many capacities. And we're going to have a beautiful conversation and sharing of ideas and sharing of creative energies tonight. And Geshe and I see this as the start of something very big that we're excited about, that we want to see as part of the Africa Innovation Summit every year. And so we have a lot of expressed interest in coming for next year's and years to come. And just to tantalize you with a few names of people that we've been in contact with who are very keen on coming for the next summit, the actor Malik Yoba, the novelist, Man Booker Prize winning novelist Marlon James from Jamaica, the visual artist Hank Willis Thomas from the US, and the rapper slash writer slash philosopher Akala from the UK, representing the UK and Jamaica, all of whom are hoping to be with us next year. So we see this as the start of something really wonderful that we can build out so as to make creativity, the arts, and a celebration of all of those things a central part of the Africa Innovation Summit.
So now, if it wasn't obvious why Baz is mentioning all of these very international names and why we have this big mix on the stage, the idea is very much that it's about Africa. We had the Africa Innovation Summit, but it's also about Africa in its wider sense, this diaspora of Africans who are all over the world, and this diaspora of creative people who are tapping into very similar energies all over the world. And speaking of energies, Bayo has just instructed me or advised me that the energy would be so much better in this room if we all came a little bit closer to the front so that we'd feel like we're a bit more together and less like we're in an auditorium. So if we could please just encourage you all just to come and congregate towards the front. Remember, artists feed off of energy as well, so we don't want to mess with that.
Yes.
Yeah, come closer, come closer.
Come join us.
So I think you're not here to listen to Baz and I anyway. You're here to listen to, see, and experience the group on stage. So I just want to mention, obviously, the support of the AIS in allowing us to do this experiment that hopefully is a keeper, but also Turkish Airlines, who've made it possible for us to have this diaspora. And I don't know if there are any people from Turkish Airlines in the room. Seeing none, I'd just like to really acknowledge how supportive they've been in terms of being able to bring the diaspora here.
And our panelists have not stopped raving about Turkish Airlines, especially the food.
Yes, yes. So thanks to Turkish Airlines and to AIS for making this possible. And of course, thanks to the generosity of everybody on the stage who we have not paid a cent. And we'll talk about that later. So I would just like to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank my co-conspirator here.
And I'll thank my co-conspirator, Geshe.
And then maybe to hand over to Dave. Dave, where are you at?
David. Welcome to David Wilson.
Please introduce him because I know he wants to introduce himself.
I hope he will introduce himself, but among many things, Dave is here representing the USA and Brazil and is one of the co-founders of the Griot, which he'll be talking more about, a very influential media platform. So welcome, Dave.
Woo.
Okay. Trying to get myself situated really quickly. I have an extra mic. You want one? There you go. Thank you, guys. I first have to say that I'm really impressed. This is an amazing, amazing venue and amazing summit. I think the summit in and of itself, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is sort of the African narrative. And one of the things that I'm impressed with about the summit is that as someone who's been indoctrinated in my early years of my life by American media, this summit here is actually changing the African narrative, and is defying what a lot of people think of Africa. And I think this is evidence of the brilliance, the innovation, the ability to find a problem and create solutions. I think is the new narrative of Africa that I think AIS is sort of exhibiting here. I'm really excited to be a part of this event, and I'm really honored to be hosting this. You know, when people think about this event, you know, we were at an innovative summit. And I know some folks are saying, well, why do we have creatives here at an innovative summit? And I think the two go hand in hand. I can speak from a personal experience about how I grew up. I grew up in a town called Newark, New Jersey, in the States. And my life as a child was plagued by a lot of negative images of the mother continent, a place that I knew where my family was tied to, my history was tied to. And if you don't believe and don't have any sense of self and have any pride about where you came from, you cannot have any hope for where you're going to go. And so for me, one of the things in my career, as I start to learn more about myself, my family history, and gain more pride, was to be able to tell stories to help other kids, young black kids, young African kids who live in America, who grew up in America, to feel inspired and to understand that they come from greatness. They come from a great people, from a great continent. And by instilling that in them, they can accomplish anything. So, you know, I went into the world of media, and I focused on stories that involve black people, African people in the Americas. And I later did a documentary about my family's history called Meeting David Wilson, which is about my journey to find answers to today's racial disparities. I journeyed through my family's past, discovered a plantation in North Carolina where my ancestors were enslaved, and discovered that that plantation was owned by a 62-year-old white man who was a direct descendant of my family's former slave owners. And this journey took me to meeting this gentleman, but I didn't stop there. I wanted to actually figure out and find out where my family came from in Africa. And I actually traced the path of my great-great-great-grandfather, who was an Ashanti man from Ghana, and who was taken over to the United States in the mid-1700s. And this journey took me back to the motherland and to my ancestral land. And so from there, I wanted to tell more stories to inspire more people about the potential that they have, and telling stories of the greatness of being black and African. And so I launched a website called The Griot. And I launched it in partnership with one of the big networks in NBC, in the States, called NBC. I eventually sold this website, which at the height of its website reached 5 million people a month. I sold it, bought it back again because I didn't like the way they were running it. And 2 years later, I sold it again, this time to a black billionaire out of Hollywood. The reason why I'm telling you this is because this is where creativity and innovation meet. Creativity, I'm a storyteller. And the individuals on this stage, they're storytellers, and these are folks who have a creative idea, and their creativity is rooted in a sense of wanting to undo or reshape a narrative. And you'll find out more about these individuals as we introduce them. And I just think this is an amazing opportunity. And so I just want you guys to sort of think about and rethink about what you may think about creativity, and how creativity and innovation go hand in hand, and how creativity can inspire innovation. So without talking any further, I want to start introducing our guests tonight, starting off with, and this is out of order, by the way, this is on my sheet, so we'll start with what we have with Ayanna Jackson. She is a filmmaker and photographer. She was born in the US, but based in South Africa. Philip Nyamigo, he's a photographer from Rwanda. Judith Kane, she's into public art, and she is also and she's based here in Rwanda. Makana Mukaka, she's a designer, he's a designer. And forgive me, guys, with the names. I'm working through. I'm also a little nervous here. We have Christian Benimana from Rwanda. Not there? He's down there? Why are you up here, man? Yeah, that's really creative right there. He's an architect. Gloria Kamanzi, she's also based in Rwanda and from Rwanda. She's a designer, and I'm visiting her shop tomorrow. We also have another designer, Matthew Rugamba, who's also based here. He's also a designer. We have Bayo Akamalafi. He's from Nigeria. I'm sorry, bruh. Did I get it right? I'm sorry. I'm trying to decolonize my tongue, so forgive me. We have Makata. Yes, Mahedo. Yes, it takes a while, 400 years, it takes a while, decolonizer. And Ingrid LaFleur. And Makata is a media personality. Bayo is a poet and a writer, a scholar, and a trickster. Trickster, that's what it has here, man. Did you write that on here, man? Okay, because it would be a trickster would do that. All right. So then we have an Ingrid. She's an Afrofuturist and politician. So please give our folks a round of applause. All right, that was the hard part for me. So I want to open it up to the panel. I want this to be more of a discussion and less of a, me pointing out. And I want people to sort of pick up cues. And if you feel moved to sort of add to certain things and sort of really, if you have a point, don't wait on me to call on you. Feel free to interject. I want this to be a lively discussion. But I want to start off talking about the African narrative. And I want to start off with first, I mentioned my perspective and my background growing up in the States, but I want to start off first with those of us who are on this panel who grew up here in the continent to talk about what they feel the current narrative is and why your work as a creative is meant to counter that narrative and how it's countering that narrative and recreating that narrative. So if no one volunteers, I'm just going to call on someone. So there you go. Ayana.
Are you saying that I start?
Yes.
Okay. The only reason that I'm volunteering to begin is because, and actually I specifically timed my presentation to 7 exact minutes, so we have to begin, sirs and ladies there. But the only reason I'm volunteering to begin is because what I am particularly concerned with is the history of photography and the construction of racial bias. So for me, I also want to, actually, I'm going to back up and give a shout out to National Geographic for apologizing for their disproportionate speculation of what like the black body can be, what the non-white body can be. And yeah, so I'm very concerned with the history of photography and the construction of racial stereotypes. So I'm gonna let this go for a moment, only because I feel like we have to think through like visual imagery and how we're taught to see, what we're taught to see, how we're taught to see each other, and how we're taught to see ourselves. right? And so as a person who inhabits a black woman's body, I am always struggling with like what it feels like to be a non-white body, what it feels like to be a marginalized body, what it feels like to not have any representation of myself that seems proximate, let alone dignified, right? So, yeah, like, in terms of how we're gonna, like, in terms of like what we're discussing here today, I don't need to click. It's just gonna play. Okay. Oh, do I need to click? Can you just press play? Because we're not gonna stop on this image. Jesus Christ. Does it keep going? If it doesn't keep going, it should, yeah, there we go. So what I've done is I've been thinking about, you know, I'm trying to revisit the narrative of the black body, right? So I'm thinking about like how the photographic universe has, oh wow, I do have to click, okay. That's a lot. How the journalists, the space of journalism has informed the narrative. So if we think through, the colonial experiment begins somewhere in the middle of the 1800s. I mean, not really begins, but it like kind of gathers its speed somewhere in the middle 1800s. That is exactly the same moment as the origin of the technology called photography, right? So photography begins around somewhere, like it's disputed between 1836 and 1839, right? And that's literally in the middle of the colonial experiment. And so what's happening is you have this kind of like wide, like rape of the land, you have this wide kind of idea that like this kind of between quotes civilizing mission, but the only reason that there's the idea that a part of the world needs to be civilized is because there's a narrative at play that says that the bodies are uncivilized, right? So, oh God, Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm gonna go forward. The missionary. So the top left photograph is of a woman named Alice Searle Harris, who is kind of on a missionizing kind of program in what was then called the Belgian Congo, right? And you know, there was this idea, so you have this kind of situation where she is presented as a woman, as a missionary. She's dressed in white, which is in a Judeo-Christian sense very emblematic. And then you have like a varied group of people in series of undress, right? You also have a hierarchy, right? So she's at the pinnacle of this kind of group. And you have these like young black bodies in various series of undress. What is, if we're going to think through visual literacy, what exactly is that saying, right? And then what happens if you change the narrative, right? So what happens if you have a white woman over white men? What happens if you have a white woman over black women? What happens if you have a black woman over white men? I'm thinking, what I want to ask with my work is, are we being visually literate about ourselves? Are we thinking about our narrative in a proper way? I don't know, like I was kind of intending to do the 7 minutes, but I feel like there's no sense in that. So I'm just gonna move on and respond.
Well, let's talk to another photographer here, Philip. And by the way, if anyone has any slides or anything to show, you know, feel free to sort of incorporate it in your opening opening discussion, or opening statements. Philip, what would you describe as your experience or your knowledge of the existing African narrative? And do you, with your work, how do you look to change it, to alter it, and how to make an impact on that in people's minds?
I don't know if my presentation is ready. I'll just quickly go through it. It's called the AIS presentation. I don't know. It's kind of obvious.
Do you want the clicker?
Yeah, you probably need this.
So how do I begin this? I'm a photographer and recently co-authored a book called This is Rwanda. And it's an aerial photography journey, which was something quite unique. And I'm glad my colleague here mentioned it, that Nat Geo apologized for, it was sort of a one-sided storytelling, basically. And so when we did this book, the idea was to show Rwanda by Rwandans. And I think that's very important if we're talking about narrative, if we're talking about the continent. We have to show our own country, our own culture. And if we wait for someone else to do it, they won't do it right. And that's why we're having this conversation. So I'll skip straight to, it took about 5 years in the making. We worked with a private company here called Kigali Aviation. They have numerous helicopters, we're talking all kinds, from a 4-seater to 6, anyways. The book it's a coffee table book, about 144 photos. And we covered all the 5 provinces of Rwanda. And the idea is, if you're Rwandan and supposedly you know your country and you've had a chance to travel, but we wanted to change that vantage point. And we weren't going to wait for Nat Geo to come here and do that for us. We said we'll do it ourselves. And it helps when you have partners that understand the vision. So that was really important. So this is what it looks like from the helicopter as you're taking off. And this is Kigali from the air. Yeah. And you get to see, obviously, Rwanda is very green. I hope you all get a chance to visit.
That's beautiful.
And this is the volcanoes. I'll tell you a quick story about that one. It took us about 2 months to be able to fly near them. They're constantly covered by clouds. And if you get a chance to go see the gorillas, it's an amazing experience. And you'll probably walk down on one of those paths down there. But we were really up high, and it took about 2 months of calling every day the gorilla guides. Are the volcanoes clear? Can we come? And we kept giving no and no and no. And then eventually they said, you know what? It looks like it's clearing up. This was like 6 a.m. in the morning, and flew really quick. Got the shot, and by the time we left that place, all the clouds were covering the volcanoes. So that happened really. So in terms of perspective, what I want to say is, like I said, it was a vantage point that hadn't been explored. Everyone travels by car, by foot, and you see your country. So it's really great. But we had the advantage, and we had the opportunity to show it from the air. So in terms of a personal journey, I studied and lived in Canada for 10 years, and I said, you know what? Not that I pretend to be. I am Rwandan, but how much do I really know my country? So I bought a one-way ticket here. And I said, there's no other way I can do this. I'll buy a one-way ticket, and I will force myself to discover my continent and my country. So, and it was really important to start archiving what we were seeing and the development, because it's happening really fast. So it was really important to be part of that storytelling. And I'll finish with a few photos. This is one of the helicopters that we use. You can wear a seatbelt. It's really like a car. So pretty dangerous, but pretty cool. This is Lake Kivu, far west, if you go northwest of the country. And for example, I've been to this lake so many times, and we go there for the summer, there's parties, and if you want to get away from the city. But I had no idea it actually looked this blue from the air. So again, just providing a different vantage point. And people in Kigali go often there for holidays and whatnot, but I'm sure they've never seen the lake this blue. So Legacy, really important. By having a book, you have something that they right,
Yeah,
cannot deny. And it's there, it's in physical form,
Yeah.
and it will live for a very long time. And I hope my daughter, for example, will get to tell her friends, this is a book, and this was Rwanda, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and just finished that the journey is a destination. So the 8 years since I've moved back, every experience that I've had documenting my country has been the destination in itself.
How's the reaction been amongst Rwandans? People here, who may have never had this sort of visual perspective of the place in which they grew up and lived.
Yeah, it was really important. When we started my company called the Loom Creative Studio, the one thing we realized was that Rwanda was constantly being defined by two things: the genocide and the guerrillas. I called it the two Gs. Yes, they're part of our history. They're really important. We have to acknowledge them. It's there. But beyond that, there was so much more happening. And we couldn't let anyone else do that. So that was the idea when we came together and we said, we're changing that narrative. We were not going to be limited by the guerrillas or the genocide, which, again, like I said, they're part of our history and you have to respect that. But there's also a vibrant, young entrepreneur scene, a tech scene, and slowly industrialization, textile, fashion, you name it. It's all happening here, and we need to be part of that, and we need to tell that to the rest of the world.
So Judith is someone who's here working with public art here. I'm very interested in hearing your perspective on the narrative. And again, if you have any slides or any material, please incorporate them as well. But shed give some of your perspective on.
Sure. Can David cue up those slides back there?
There's a mic there. I don't think
Is this not working?
not working.
Yeah, it's working.
There you go.
Okay.
Just have to be clear.
So I have an arts organization that I started here about 5 years ago. The name in Kinyarwanda is Kurema Kureba Kwiga, which means to create, to see, to learn. And we focus on taking art out of the gallery and into the streets to change the face from something that might be bland and beige to something that is more vibrant and colorful. And we do this by working both with young people that may have never touched a paintbrush before, and then with professional artists. This is something painted in this convention center last month for another summit. We bring artists from around the region and the continent, as well as from around the world, to collaborate, connect, and inspire and engage with artists in the city and around the country. Oops. So this work happens in the context of schools and in communities, as well as with public institutions. This is at the Kigali Public Library, through different types of public-private partnerships. Again, this is painted in this building. Some of our work has really explicit messages. This is one of our first pieces that was done in 2014 in partnership with the Ministry of Health. Again, explicit messages that can be easily understood. And I hope that the work winds up sharing messages that reach all types of people. So in this, you'll see someone who you don't know is male or female that's engaging in the act of cleaning and beautifying and taking care of their place. And this is representative of the monthly event or practice known as Umuganda, which is a day of community service. Oops. So like I said, this is jumping. We really try to take art outside and engage people in their own creativity with the idea that it promotes critical thinking and that putting color outside helps connect more people to arts and expression. And part of the goal behind this is to promote this idea that people have stories to share, and that when we can put them outside and in public, that they reach new audiences. I think it's exciting that young people kind of take center stage in a lot of the work that we do. And sometimes when we have different artists present, they'll just add art for the sake of art, which is kind of a new push. as opposed to art that is for sale to tourists or art that is only used to promote a health message, for example. The idea of just sharing art and creativity is something that we think engages people to think outside the box and reach new goals, and hopefully promotes critical thinking that I ultimately think is part of building up the knowledge-based economy that Rwanda is pushing for. Sometimes we do this with technology, sometimes we share the work with visitors and tourists. I think it's really important for Rwandan artists to have their own presence in the media. I am not from the continent of Africa, as you might have guessed. I'm from the United States. But I believe that the platform that I've created is more about the people that I work with, and that their messages need to reach beyond the gallery context or beyond, like the narrative that Philippe mentioned, that this historical concept. And we're trying to push the sharing of news stories, but also celebrate cultural traditions, and push what we can in the city and beyond the city to grow the art scene. So, bye. That's the end of this one. You can pass this on.
So I'm trying to bridge this together because we also have other folks like architects here who also deal with art in public space. Architect and design is public art as well, many would say and I would say. So we have two architects here. We have Christian and Mokina. If you will, describe what how you feel that your work in architecture here is providing a new landscape and providing a new landscape and providing new inspiration here. We know that Christian is from Rwanda and Mokina is from South Africa, but describe what motivates you about the current narrative of Africa in your work. And if you have some slides, feel free to share them with us as well.
Cool. Thank you. My presentation is underneath Maikeka. Thank you. So, thank you for the introduction, but just to give a bit of clarity, although I'm an architect, this current presentation is not an architectural project, but it's actually a critique of brands which need to exist or don't exist, so to speak. For example, if one thinks of the continent, if you look at the top 100 brands in Africa, only 12 are actually African. And that speaks to a broader question about who's framing the narrative, what do we consume, how do we actually shape ourselves, the fashion, the clothes that we buy, the cars that we drive. And I'm quite interested in a new type of Africa where we can begin to create brands from Africa, but not just for ourselves, but for global consumption. And I think in the creation of brands, you'll be able to rebrand identity. So although I can talk about architecture, this particular presentation is really about, frankly, an eponymous brand that I've created in the last 2 years. So let's see how this slide goes. Okay, how does this work? Okay, so I'm just gonna explain it very, very quickly, and it's essentially an African interpretation of tequila. And I say this because I've been to many bars and so on, and I struggle to see African spirits there. And you might ask me, why would I pick tequila as a sort of entry point in terms of creating a beverage? Well, first of all, the agave plant actually grows in Africa, which is not very well known. And it's been here for quite a while. And part of the inspiration there, I said, if I could create a luxury spirit brand, what would that do for not only African consumption, but for how people see Africa? And hopefully this slide will work, pointer. So I named it after my family, and you probably see the little logo in the background. That's actually a baboon. Now, in Western culture, the baboon is not necessarily a glorified creature, but it's actually my clan animal. And in my clan, the baboon is the wisest animal, it is the most cunning animal, and it's seen as the animal that actually provides wisdom to others. So I decided with this particular brand to actually reference my culture and put it into that space, particularly to deal with the stigmas and the sort of misrepresentations of what Africa is about. The name itself, Mulometi, actually means firewater. And when I was talking to spirit people, people said, Mula what? We're not going to say that. Then I said, well, when people started Jägermeister, how does that work? And everybody nodded. So I said, we have to be bold enough in terms of tapping into our own culture and our own heritage to actually create brands and ideas. So this pointer is quite an exciting one. I don't know, where am I pointing? Where am I pointing? Okay, I'm centered. Okay, there we go, there we go. So and we had to put, a little pronunciation, Mulo Metsi, which means firewater. It's also a bit of a play on how many indigenous people, when they first encountered alcohol, described it as a sort of firewater. I'm pointing. And one of the things that was interesting was whether one could make an African luxury brand. And I remember talking to an investor from San Francisco, and they said to me, your stuff looks too fancy. You should actually wrap your bottle in a banana leaf because that looks African. It's got to be. Wow. And I said to them, the richest person in history was an African, actually. And gold comes from here, diamonds come from here. So why are you telling me that we can't associate luxury with our continent just because we've had the last couple of 100 years of poverty? So then they kind of nodded. Said, okay, I get it. But what about the banana leaf? So this is really a struggle, but that's an image from Lesotho, and it's quite interesting. I don't know if you've watched Black Panther. So you'll probably see the Basotho blanket there, isn't there? And just on the right-hand side, you can see the agave plant, which grows there. So I'm not inventing it. It's been there for like the last 200 years, but never cultivated. But I decided to try and work on the mythology of the place to tap into the culture, and that informed the design of the bottles, which you'll hopefully see any moment now. This is really becoming a creative session. Anyway, so I'm actually wondering if I should just abandon this and just talk you guys through the rest of the presentation, because I think if we keep stopping on each slide. So to cut a long story short, I'm interested in the transition of where we are toward a sort of Afrofuturist perspective, where we can begin to produce products which can stand anywhere in the world. Now, we can talk about African cars, we can talk about African fashion, and my particular take in this case was looking at an indigenous plant and actually converting it to create a beverage which could be consumed around the world. And I think, for me it was interesting because, I'm an architect, as you picked up, but I designed the bottle myself. So that was also difficult because nobody locally believed it could be done by me or even built. And I spoke to all the manufacturers in South Africa. It couldn't be done. I had to get it done in China. That's another critique about methods of production. Sorry?
It looks like the Joburg Stock Exchange. You know the building of the Stock Exchange in Johannesburg?
I've never thought of that, but I can roll with that. Yeah.
The bottle looks like the. Sorry.
Yeah. No. It's nothing wrong at all. Nothing. I'm always quite intrigued about the different manifestations. I mean, it's partly inspired by diamonds because diamonds are found in Lesotho, so it's quite a faceted bottle. And funny enough, it's also inspired by the World Trade Center too, because if you look at the square, it actually rotates. So there's a bit of architecture also in terms of the building. It's a mini building made into a bottle. And then this notion of African alchemy, which is like, how do you combine different things? So I also designed the flavor, designed the recipe, I designed a series of teas that actually go with the drink. And again, people said to me, an architect, what are you doing designing teas and designing flavors and talking to distillers? But what I like about this session is that I think it opens the possibility that our creative enterprise can go beyond our discipline and can allow other sorts of connectivity to happen. And last but not least, I wanted to actually connect creativity to purpose, because on the one hand, one could talk about the agave plant, but there's a bigger narrative here in that 1 in 5 Africans are more or less vulnerable to food insecurity or food nutrition challenges, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the continent is vulnerable to climate change as well as soil erosion. And Lesotho is currently one of the most soil eroded countries in Africa, and it's a serious problem for sub-Saharan Africa. So the agave plant is one of the best plants for actually sequestering soil. So rather than starting a soil charity or a food charity, we need to feed African people. I reckon rather create a luxury product that if you bought it, that would be the new form of exchange to help build Africa. Because I believe the way to help Africans is to trade with us. Don't give us aid. Don't disrespect us. Buy our products. That's what we need. And that was my position. How do you create assets which actually have a social, environmental, and a sort of ecological purpose? So it's not just about making a bottle that's cool or having good drinks. It's about actually saying, how can we own our future through the creation of brands, using creative enterprise, but actually dealing with real African problems. And I apologize for the rest of the presentation, not being able to go through. Just some more shots of the bottle there. So there's the white is the entry target market. Well, it doesn't matter. I don't want to hog this space because of my colleagues. Let me pass it on.
All right.
How's
Well, did you bring any samples?
Yeah,
That's what we all want to know. I've been waiting for, a little Oprah moment.
I'm building appetite right now, right?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's actually pretty inspiring. We'll move on to the other architect, Christian.
We got some serious tech stuff going on.
Can I go now? I don't see my slides. Disclaimer, my presentation is not about tequila or any other beverages. I think mine is more of a kind of rebellious nature about how we, the processes that we have or exists currently that help shape our physical world are actually not helping. And we need to fundamentally change that. And we believe that in this process of changing the African narrative, it's not enough to change it so it can be as good as the narratives have been portrayed. But it should be changed well enough that it also informs how other narratives, other parts of lives should change for the better. It's not enough to do it just for the African continent. It has to be globally relevant as well. So we have a few fundamentals. I'm an architect, I'm a practicing architect here in Rwanda, but our company works in about 11 countries in Africa and about 15 countries around the world. But through our practice, we have fundamental beliefs that drive everything we do. And the first one is that everything we do must have a very clear, transmissible, and legible mission. It needs to be understood about what it wants to achieve, and everyone should know what that is about. We believe that everything we do must be rooted into a specific context. And because of that, no solution can be applied exactly the same way in different locations, different contexts, and different cultures. That's laziness that has hurt us in the past and continues to do so. We believe our work, it's going slowly. We believe our work has an impact. It's not a matter of knowing if, but it's a matter of knowing how much. Is it positive? Is it negative? Can we quantify it? And if we quantify it, can we do something about it? If we can't, then should we have done what we did in the first place, or should we change and do something different? And then number 4, so who benefits from our work? Who is our client? Who pays for what we do, and who benefits from the results of our work? Architects are notoriously known to work very long hours, but traditionally, usually those hours going to unpaid competitions, trying to fight for work, and you find that even when you do in that contract, the person cutting your check, who in the majority of the time is actually not your end user of your building, because your building life cycle is 150 years maybe, and that person would only be coming to visit it once a week, but because they're the developer, they get to make every single decision about that particular space, regardless of the thousands and thousands of people who are going to be interacting in that particular space. So there's an equality in there about people who have the power to build and the the people who actually have to live with that space for the rest of their lives. So we want to question who actually benefits from the product of our work and work for them, first of all. Then the last one, which is very, very important, that there's this notion in the architectural spheres, maybe McKenna will talk about this later, there's this existential debate that form follows function or function follows forms. I don't know what old architects were arguing about on this issue. It was there when I was born and still there. But we believe that it's not a question about choice, and we believe that our built space cannot achieve its fully function unless it's also beautiful. And that beauty can be defined in any way you can imagine, in the arts, in the creative, in fashion, in culture, however you define beauty. That project has to achieve some aspect of that beauty. Now, why this is particularly important, specifically for our context. Rwanda, at 493 inhabitants per square kilometer, is the most densely populated country on the mainland Africa. And what that means is, when you look at these population charts that everybody's been talking about in many conferences that you might have heard of about population growth in Africa, we in Rwanda are at the forefront of these problems. Population growth is high, density is high, which means most problems we are encountering at the moment are going to be reflected in other countries in the coming years. So that gives us a very unique opportunity for us to experiment solutions here that could lead to alleviate some disasters in other countries later. Then there's also this urbanization, which is part of what we've been talking about. I'll try to go fast here. By 2040, for the first time in the history of this continent, we're going to have more people living in cities than in rural areas, which is a fundamental shift in how you understand our built space and how we interact with them. This slide was looking much better when it was in PDF, but this gentleman forced me to convert it into PowerPoint. I apologize. Following Mokena's nice graphics is not that easy to put those disclaimers out. So when we think in terms of like, how do we quantify the task ahead as we shapers of built environment, this is a quick example of trying to understand the magnitude of what we have to deal with and why those beliefs are very important. So these are kind of like projections of, with that increase in population, of additional infrastructure, some of the infrastructure that we have to put up. And this shows you that we need to be proactive, be quick, but also do it well if we want to change this narrative. So we believe our work is never neutral. And if that's the case, then we have to do something about it. We have to do work that actually exemplify that. We have to research and we have to advocate. We have to talk about why this is important. We have to be here and do all of these things. I'll jump very quickly in this. So this is the traditional architectural design construction, and then we see our role expanding. Our professional intervention has to expand and include all of these things, including from visioning to evaluation of projects. And what does that mean? So we need to leverage this opportunity to create systemic change. And that systemic change is the one that is going to allow us to influence the narrative, the spaces that affect us, and then change our behaviors as well, because the spaces shapes our behaviors. What does that mean? When we did this hospital, this was our first project ever, we questioned the fundamental setup of rural hospitals in Africa, primarily. And what we found was that there was a possibility of building them in a way that themselves as buildings can promote a couple of things, including social inclusion, infection control, etc., which we did in this particular project. Now, following that, and patient centricity, of course, try to understand from a patient perspective what is a healing space looks like and how can you promote that within a building. So following that, we worked with the government of Liberia and the government of Rwanda to build some standards behind that. And then for the past 10 years, 10 years or so, we've been working to refine what this means in terms of setting up this infrastructure so that we can assist this government to build this plan, so envision, plan, design and build these hospitals better and then evaluate them to see how successful they've been. And 10 years later, this is the hospital we're building right now in Monrovia, Liberia. This is Munini District Hospital. It's being built in the south of Rwanda at the moment. It's a district close to Burundi. And This is Nyarugenge District Hospital. It's being built in the city of Kigali, in southern district called Nyarugenge, which is actually, it's the next hill over. So, to wrap up, basically, what does this mean for when we talk about narratives and changing architecture? When we do this type of projects, we don't start from a point of saying, what can we afford to do in this place? But we start from a place of saying, what does every citizen on this planet deserve? And then how can we push that, for that target within this particular project? What can we realistically achieve and what can't we achieve? And then how do we make sure that these type of projects are not only there to fill space, but they're there to reinforce and sustain our existential societal systems that helps us live as a community. That's what we do.
Makina mentioned the fact of having black or African brands represented in the continent, and you brought up a statistic that I didn't know, that of the top 100 brands in Africa, that only 12 are actually owned by Africans, which is really shocking to know. But we have two people here who actually own two fashion brands here, who have stores here, and I want to talk to them a little bit about what influenced them to create their brand and to create the clothing that they're creating now, and what do they see and why this is important for them and why this is important for Rwanda. They're both here from Rwanda. One is Gloria. We can start with Gloria, and then the other is Matthew. If you have slides, I will say in the interest of time, let's try to limit the time because there's more people and I want to actually have some discussion around some topics. But Gloria?
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. I would say I'm more in the textile design industry, which I would consider as an industry that is not very strong in the continent. I just want to maybe say what we do. We are, my company's name is Glow Creations. We are a textile design and printing company. So we beautify the textile. We come up with patterns and other forms of images on textile. And we started with hand printing, but we are looking forward to evolve other printing techniques. I just want to get your attention here for you to understand. I just want to go to the next image in order for you to understand what I'm trying to say. I just want to get your attention here looking at the fabrics that in Africa that we put on. There are these fabrics, they call them African fabrics. I don't know if you believe they are really African fabrics. I happened to make a research when I got involved in the textile design. You may be familiar with a brand called Vilsco. It's a Dutch brand, but they came on the continent. They looked at our patterns, our designs, and then they got inspired from the Asian printing techniques, and they had to combine that. And they brought that printed textile to the continent. So for those who are from West Africa, it's mostly in West Africa and it came down. And you find that for us to be able to be well dressed, to have colorful fabrics with prints, it has to come from abroad. Sorry, it seems, okay, I'll just leave it there. So it has to come from abroad. Then I realized that it's like we were not able to come up with our own brands and use our patterns that are part of our heritage. So I discovered that later on with my research that some of the African patterns are being borrowed in the Western. I'm not being against Western, don't get me wrong. They're being borrowed. When I see, like for example, Rwandan patterns on the paintings, the black and white patterns, if you see some, there are some which are similar with Finland. I like to do a research on Finnish companies when it comes to printing. So I realized that we were not being confident coming up with the patterns. So I said, let me do a research on how many African textile designers do we have in the continent. I realized we don't really have enough. Then I said, I'm going to go through this journey and show what we are capable. I happened to visit Ivory Coast, whereby there is a factory called Uniwax, and I happened to visit the design department, and I realized most of them, they were Ivorian, but the head who guides and everything manage is from Western country. So I was like, why can't we do that? So as Glow Creation, as a textile designer, so I'm into this journey and I believe we can offer more. So we have to open our eyes and see how can we involve our communities, how can we involve young people who are going through different specific sectors to use patterns that are part of the African heritage to be exposed. One thing I just want to get your attention is that through my journey of work, I noticed that there were so many things hidden, and I asked myself, why can't we know what we have as heritage in terms of design, in terms of patterns, and even knowing the story, where like there are a number of times I was being asked, like the pattern that you see there, what does it mean? That I realized that I have to give myself an assignment to search deeper. So we are a company that works on a number of projects. I just want to say on the other side that I'm a fashion designer, but mainly we focus on textile, like having the fabric printed, having those fabric printed. We have a different line. We have a line just to show how the printed fabric can be used in a line of clothing, in a line of accessories. For the pictures that you see, we had to choose a line of home accessories because we realized it would get the attention of people very quickly. So that's what I could say. Thank you.
You go ahead.
Me?
No, we're actually to Matthew. I'm sorry. Matthew's right there. I'm sorry. Matthew, you also deal with fashion design, and you also have a store here. Excuse me for that. You have a store here. Talk to us about what's your inspiration, and why you. What was the impetus for you starting your line, and what makes your line distinct here as a Rwandan, and why? What's so important about it, and why more designers here exercise their right to start their own businesses, and what's the quality in what you do here?
Okay, so I came up with the idea for my brand in 2011. I'd just done my second year of college in the United States, and it kind of came out of a combination of frustration and inspiration. Being away from home, I was forced to talk about my country, where I'm from, and I was frustrated because of the perceptions, you know. meet people, and once there was an underhanded comment about whether people wear clothes back home. So I was like, what? You know, that's ridiculous. I said, you know, these people that you see in the ads supposedly living on $1, they probably have better outfits than you.
Right.
And that's just because of the way that we carry ourselves, you know. I think back every Christmas, I go up to my ancestral home in the villages, and you go to church and you see these people in their prized suit, prized dress, prized shoes, walking with such dignity and class, and the income level, it doesn't matter. And I wanted to sort of capture that idea, that swagger, that style, that sophistication, that transcends income brackets. It's really about carrying oneself with dignity. And I thought that fashion is very personal. I don't walk around with my religion on my forehead. You don't know my background, you don't know my story. But if I make a decision to wear certain clothes, that's saying something about my character, that says something about my history. And so that's why I decided to tell a story through fashion. Actually, once I made my first samples, I actually went into Illume Creative Studio. Those are the first people that I showed, because I wanted my brand to be about storytelling, about creating this new idea of Africa, and I felt that creating a product that is very personal, that people can wear to express themselves, would be the best part. Last year, I worked on a collection for Fashion Week that we put on, and it was called Kinyozi, and it was inspired by the African barbershop culture. And there's a distinct way that you see the posters, the pictures, and people coming in. It's a very personal relationship. If I don't call my barber for a week, he checks up on me. He sends a
How's your hair?
He just wants to check that I'm still alive. So I think that there's so many different aspects of this culture that I wanted to share and express. I actually have a video lined up. You guys, you have the video? I just want to share a bit of
video, right? So it should just
what transpired in this last fashion week.
Find me a Kendall Jenner, I'll be a gentleman to her. Catch up. Give me a Jordan, that she never gon' finish a nigga. Oh yeah. Walk by, on fire, baby, can't else it. That body banging, what's that? You should model, girl, with your bouquet. Walk by, on fire, baby, can't else it. That body banging, what's that? I walk by again, I need a look for you. Go, switch, switch, go, 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 switch, go, switch, my bitch, go, there go, switch, there go, go. Make sure your posture right, baby. Show my love tonight. I know I did. And she told me fuck her and call her a bad bitch. I can never cuff her, I'm stuck on this rap shit. Fucking up the budget with nothing but rap shit. I know I did. Straight by the Twitter, be calling shawty a queen. Head game silly, might give her the Don C. Head game killing, I get her a new quick. In case you behind, oh, let me remind you the way that I make my move. Wale from the Maybach crew. Heard about me, what they say about you. 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 Party in the hills, tell that pussy come through. Hold it. Walk by. On fire, baby, can't douse it. That body banging, what's that? You should model, girl, with your bouquet. Bye. On fire, baby, can't douse it. That body banging, what's that? I walk by again, I need a look quick. Hold it. Go, switch, go, switch, go, switch, go. I got you. Go, switch, my bitch. You wanna sit front row? Ask me, get anything that you want, though. She a fashion killer, me, I'm a cut though. Going out tonight, she said that she wants coke. One Oak, a Webster, up and down. Paparazzi gon' think that I'm cuffing now. It's casual, I call you up when I'm back in town. We fall out, but she always come back around. Hit Barney's and fuck up a check there. In the dressing room, fuck have sex there. Was taking so long, she trying the next pair. People see us everywhere and they just stare. And she mixing off white with SL. I got my Vans on, bitch, I dress well. I'm from the Bay, I see her once in a blue moon. Until Paris Fashion Week, I soon it's too soon. Hey. Walk by, on fire, baby, can't dance it. That body banging, what's that? You should model, girl, with the overkin.
Yeah, so if you thank you. So actually, in that video, that is my actual barber, and the sign that you saw in the background that says Tayo's Barbershop is from about 20 years ago. My mom had a barbershop, and it was named after me because I loved just being in that environment. And, I was always helping, trying to work on different things there. So I feel that there's so many different aspects of our culture and of our lifestyle, that are really underappreciated, and I feel that I'm using fashion as a way to celebrate them, to give us dignity and value. There's so many stories to tell on this continent, and so many different aspects, things that we have ignored and we shouldn't ignore any longer.
And FYI, I'm stopping at both of your shops tomorrow, Matthew and Gloria.
Shopping.
So, what's your price point like? Talk about that really quick. What's your price points? Is it, and how do you factor that into your products here?
I mean,
A friend wants to know.
Sorry?
A friend wants to know.
Is this friend visiting tomorrow?
Yes, I believe so.
Well, I would say in Rwanda it's considered at the higher end. However, if you had these products in different markets, it's mid-range.
Mm-hmm.
Mid-range, low to mid-range. And one of the things that we're working on is trying to get our products into these different markets. And in I guess in the local context, if our products are considered more expensive for the average Rwandan, then it's about creating value for it. So, I'll sit down with the client, let's say I'm making a suit for them, and say, yes, you can get a cheaper suit out there, but let's look at the cost per wear. How many times are you going to wear this suit? And so when you look at the cost per wear, if this suit is worn out after a year, and then I make them a suit that lasts 5 to 10 years, if you look at cost per wear, my suit is cheaper. So it's really about creating context and looking at the different markets, the different customers that we engage with, and giving them value. So it might not be for all my products, it might not, but at least there'll be something within my product line that will work out.
It's cool. It's good stuff. I want to move on to two of the folks who are actually representing, who are in the media here. One is Makeda and Bayo, and the other is Bayo. Makeda G is both of Jamaican and Rwandan descent. You have a YouTube channel here. You're also a DJ, but you also have a YouTube channel. Talk to me about what you do to push forward the narrative here in Rwanda and also the continent.
Okay. Thank you. So my name is Makeda, and so I have a vlog channel on YouTube, and like you said, I'm also a DJ. I've been on the radio for years, not at the moment, but I was, and on TV. And I really loved telling stories when I was on TV. And I started vlogging after I stopped, after I left TV, so that I could continue telling the stories. So one of the things that, the reason why I even started doing the vlog was so that I could tell my family back home in Jamaica what my life was like here. So I grew up in Jamaica. I was born in the States. I moved to Jamaica when I was young with my mom. And I grew up there. And I went to high school there, university there, and everything. And I only came to Rwanda sort of on a whim, like by chance, when I was like 22, 23. And before that, I didn't know much about Rwanda or about Africa at large, if I'm gonna be real. And it didn't come up that much in my life, in my childhood when I was growing up. Nobody really taught me much about it. I knew a lot about the Caribbean and about the States, but mostly what I knew about Africa and about Rwanda was tragedy, poverty, and then whatever National Geographic told me. So it was only when I went to university, I studied literature and I took a lot of African literature classes when it just started opening my mind a lot more, made me a lot more curious, cut to when I came here. But even before that, I thought of maybe visiting, and I couldn't find anything about Rwanda online. That was just something to sort of comfort me. Because all I knew was about the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, I was a bit nervous to come, I was like, I want to go. I know I'm half Rwandan. I think I know I have some family there, but because I didn't have a point of reference here, I didn't have anyone to call and say, how's it going? And anything I would look up was just nothing to I was like hotels in Rwanda or anything, And so finally when I came, I had so much fun. I felt so at home. Someone, I think Philippe said that he bought a one-way ticket. I had a round-trip ticket. I definitely wasn't planning on staying, but I felt so at home. I felt so comfortable. I met so many wonderful people. I learned so much about the culture. And I was so intrigued that I just kept, postponing and then eventually ended up staying. And because of that, I was like, I have to tell these stories. Like, I have to share what I'm learning here for anybody else who is out there, who maybe is like me and is from a country that they've never been to or has ever even been curious about Rwanda. I just wanted to put casual videos out there, just saying, these are things to do in Rwanda. I don't speak Kinyarwanda. This is my journey, learning how to speak Kinyarwanda. Meeting different artists, meeting different people and telling other people's stories. That became sort of like a little mini mission of mine, just to put as much positive things out there as possible so that when people are researching, they can see, okay, there's all the information, in the world about other things. So because I thought that was lacking, that's what I decided to do, take that up and do that. I have a little tiny video. It's just the intro video. David, there's two. You can only play the one, and it's the one that says intro trailer. Welcome to my channel. Hey. My name is Makeda. This channel is going to be a lot of me just telling my own story. Why? Who cares? That's a good question. Who am I? All right. I'm a media personality in East Africa. I DJ. I'm a radio presenter and producer for the past 5 years. Damn, that's a long time. So I've been doing TV as well. I MC a lot of different events, and now I feel like I can add to my little CV that I'm a content creator. And I'm really, really excited about that. What can you expect on this channel? Expect videos about the things that I love. Travel, food, music, different things that I engage myself in all the time, but also different aspects of life living in East Africa. I want you guys to come along with me and we can tell this story together. If you haven't subscribed yet, gonna ask you to subscribe. No pressure, up to you. Welcome to my channel. If that wasn't recording, I will scream. Okay. Yeah, so whenever I get a comment or something on a video or people DMing me and saying, I didn't even think about coming, I hadn't been since I was a baby, or I was born here, but I'm Rwandan, and I know where I'm gonna go when I come now, or can we meet up when I come, or whatever. And just hearing excitement, it just encourages me to continue doing it, because I wish that I had videos like that. I would have probably have come earlier. When I think about, the fact that I only came when I was that age, I'm like, dang. Maybe I'd be speaking Kinyarwanda by now. So you don't have to clap for that, please.
So Bio, is the poet, writer, scholar, and as it says here, trickster. Talk to me about how do you leverage your talents in sort of rewriting, if you will, the stories and the perception of the continent.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll start this way by first noticing what we're doing here. I feel that at this point in history, we've reached some kind of inflection point where it is now possible to say we no longer need to subscribe to the narratives of inadequacy that we have been conditioned by for so long. So I don't know exactly why you're here, but I feel that this is part of some kind of secret world government or secret African government that is reframing and retelling new stories. But I want to do this. I want to tell a story in response to my brother's question, since he's named me a trickster. By doing this first, there's something about the energy of space and place that invites more to be told, or invites it to be shared in a particular way. So since I have the mic, I have the power, I'm going to invite everyone here to please stand up on your feet, first of all. Just stand up on your feet. When Geshe told me to come to Creative Night, I didn't expect this. You guys are too serious, for crying out loud. Green faces, suits, and all this. This is supposed to be playful and joyful, right? So the first thing I'm going to invite you to do is to give an awkward high five to the person next to you. Just give an awkward high five. Make it as awkward as possible. The kind that misses its mark and just goes somewhere else. That kind of stuff. Awkward. What? Okay, right. Okay, and then you end with the ritual that has been African for so long. It's a technology, it's innovative, it's called a hug. So I wanted to hug someone very tightly, so tightly that your skin would stain the other person's skin, if you will. So do that, please. Just go for it, please. And if possible, guys, listen. If possible, drag the person closer to you. Just drag the person closer to you. As you hug, relocate, deterritorialize the person, and re-territorialize the person next to you, all right? So bring the person close. Let's congregate together. Secret world governments are coherent, right? Okay, my time is good. You guys should get back to your seats. Feel better now?
Yes.
Feel better now?
Yes.
Okay,
Feeling more creative.
okay, so trickster stuff. My name is Bayo Akomalafe. I will tell you the history of my name if there were time to do so, but I will skip that part. You can read the book about it. Shameful plug. You can read the book about it. But I come from Nigeria, and I grew up in Nigeria and many other parts of the world because my father was a diplomat. So I spent
Nigeria for president.
What do you say?
Nigeria for president.
Yes. Hopefully not.
Hopefully.
Okay. I teach psychology in the university. I'm a professor of clinical psychology. And I was just recently appointed a visiting professor at Middlebury College. I also teach at Sonoma State University. And I consult with UNESCO, my big brother there, Real. And the kind of work that I do is tethered to the notion of whiteness and white normativity and what it means to be human today. But it started with a question about what it means to be black and what it means to be a black body in a time when borders are, becoming porous and melting away. Now, all those things that I mentioned that I do, there's none as important as my major, most sacred task, which is changing the diapers of my son. That's the most sacred work that I do. So I'm really ashamed that I don't have a slide to show you of me changing his,
No, that's not necessary.
But I do that, and it's my sacred work, and it's innovation at its best. How to approach the every time. So the thing is, head back, right? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
I wrote a book to my daughter, exploring what it means to be black. Not trying to teach her in her time. She's 4 years old right now, but I imagined I was writing to her in the future, a future that I probably will not reach. And I wrote to her about how we messed up in this generation. And how my father's messed up, and how she might be inheriting a world that is out of whack. And this is the book that I wrote. It's my second book, actually. It's called These Wilds Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter and Humanity's Search for Home. And it is about ecofeminism and new materialisms and what it means to occupy a place that seems queer. I've heard many people talk about walking out of the box or thinking out of the box. I don't need to be a psychologist to realize that you can't encourage people to walk out of the box or think outside the box. It's not an idea. It represents real bodily limitations. And so we need to meet the monstrosity of the box. We need to face it head on and let something happen to us, in a sense. And so my work is about queering the categories with which we think. It's about thinking about our thinking, or telling stories about the stories that we tell, so to speak. Somewhat dealing with what has been occluded, or excluded, or made invisible, or dismissed. This is what I do. So that's why maybe I have earned the accolade of a trickster. So I'm going to tell you a story, just a brief reading from my book. Remember that all the letters in this book are written to my daughter. So you're eavesdropping, in a sense, when you hear these words. But before I do that, I would say that when I was born and I grew up, I actually was born in white conditions. By white conditions, I mean that I actually at some point believed I was white. I know it's a hard sell, considering how I present myself to you right now. It wasn't a matter of being blind or something. It was a matter of my entire subjective realm being anchored to the notion of whiteness. Like my hero was Chuck Norris. My lands may not have white people strolling around, but they're still tethered to the notion of white supremacy and white normativity, development, GDP, progress. We think in those categories today. And so in some senses, we in Africa are white because we have only learned to auto-colonize ourselves, to reproduce those patterns with which we were colonized. And I didn't know this at first because a fish in water doesn't know it's wet, right? Until you kind of bring it out of the water. So I started to examine my whiteness. I read Wole Soyinka, I read Chinua Achebe. I started to meet myself as if for the first time. This is just a play call. How many of you have read Chinua Achebe in the house? Just wave your hands in the air.
Who hasn't?
And wave them like you just don't care. And that's the only rap I know. So that's a shame. You know. How many of you have read Wole Soyinka? Okay. You can put your hands down. You can put your hands down if you're okay. Everyone do a Wakanda forever. Just do a Wakanda forever. Wakanda forever. Okay, just to know where I'm at home. And so I started to explore my blackness. What does it mean to be black at this time? I wanted to own it. I would go to places where Badagry, for instance, in Lagos, to learn about what it meant to have been a slave. I would look for some kind of pristine condition of blackness. I wanted to change my accent so that I sounded more black, you know. How are you? Something like that. I wanted some kind of black, authentic identity. But that was tethered, you know, in owning blackness that way, I was strangling its emergence. And I was trying to own a product. And so I shifted to some kind of Pan-Africanism, where I wanted to champion and say, to hell with white people. I actually went through this. To hell with white people. I wrote my first book. We will tell our own stories with Professor Molefi Asante. And I championed blackness everywhere I went to. I was very brittle. You know, if you came near me, I would call you out for not being black enough or not doing something appropriate, something like that. But that didn't work. The more I tried to own it, the more it faded away. Until I started to situate myself in something more emergent, something feminist, something beautiful, something earth-honoring, something indigenous. I went to indigenous elders. I was conducting my doctoral research. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I'm shrinking all of you at this moment, though you don't know. I sat with those elders, indigenous men, Yoruba healers, and this is just a quick example. I would ask them a question like, what does it mean to have auditory hallucination? I was trying to examine what it meant to be sick or to have healing from a Yoruba perspective. And those men totally turned my world upside down. They would say, for instance, why would you want to heal yourself from voices you hear? Why would you want to give pills to that? What if those are your ancestors trying to reach out to you? This might not appeal to most of you wearing suits here, because it doesn't fit into the paradigm, the metric of skills and development. But this tells us that there is a lot more we are sidestepping as Africans. We deceive ourselves if we feel we can step away from what haunts us, what has been repressed in the name of gaining skill or height. And these men brought me home to myself, asked me new questions, or helped me articulate new questions. So, the reading I want to give today is basically, I was actually going to give two, but that's not going to be possible. Okay, brother, thank you. So this is to my daughter. My wife is Indian, so it's almost impossible to kind of say where my wife is actually Iranian, Indian, English, Nigerian. So it's hard to say where she's from or to answer that question anymore. But I write to her about where I come from, Nigeria. And so I start this way. In Nigeria, where I grew up and where your mother's father was born, in the cities, the air is thick with a forgetfulness and a busyness, with a preference for white anthologies. Everyone rushes about with a skeptical pout, fulfilling the prophecies of a forlorn myth, the sides of their faces nailed tight to the phones in their hands, singing the lyrics of a song singing the lyrics of a song that has no rhythm or sway. We speak development and progress and GDP. We endorse their standards of excellence. We tell ourselves that the white man knows the way forward, and we curse and spit at ourselves because we do not add up to the cherished figure of the foreigner. Because our airports don't have functioning carousels or operating air conditioning units. Because blackness often feels like an unfortunate deviation from the default of whiteness. And we shake our heads when the television screen lights up with the images of another building or engineering feat in the legendary West. There's even a song for the moments when we feel there's something wrong with us and everything right with them. Come and see American Wonder. Come and see American Wonder. It is said, however, by those among us who seem to know better about our nobility that we have lost our own stories, our own histories, our own senses of fortitude and worth. They say, in effect, that we have potholes in our roads, not because we are laughably inadequate to the task of tarring our highways, but because something in the soil resists the finality of the industrial order. And potholes might very well be the orifices through which other potential political imaginaries breathe. So that sense that there are other places of power, thank you. That sense that there are other places of power, other ways of being in the world, other ways of performing reality, that might not be tethered to skill and numbers and GDP and suited guys, is what I hope that we can help make happen. Other nature cultures bursting out from the seams, if you will. And I hope that with what we're doing today, with all the brothers and sisters that we have in the family today, that those possibilities will become even more possible. Thank you.
Okay, so in addition to going to these two shops tomorrow, I got to pick up your book. Can you give me the name of the book again? Because I'm sure everyone actually wants.
Where'd you put it, dude?
It's not just for me.
These wilds beyond our fences, letters to my daughter and humanity's search for home.
Okay, cool. I want an autograph.
Come into a store near you.
Oh, okay.
Everywhere.
So you mentioned the future, and this is obviously Ingrid knows I'm coming to her last person, but definitely not the least. And I want you to talk about Afrofuturism. She's from Detroit, but very involved in the continent and also in Afrofuturism. You can explain how you got involved with Afrofuturism and what do you believe it means for the future and the narrative of the continent?
Awesome. Thank you guys for still being here. This has been a really interesting journey, wonderfully curated to come right after the potential imaginaries, right? So if you could start the slide for Ingrid Lafleur, I'd appreciate it. I like to start with a quote by Ta-Nehisi Coates, if it comes on the screen, that talks about how white supremacy and racism, as we discuss this, I really want people to understand and to kind of remember how it viscerally affects us, right? And so my artistic practice, which I've started about 4 years ago, is all about healing the traumas in the Black body. And I do this by creating crystals, sculptures with healing crystals that like resonate this healing energy. I give you a black tourmaline when I do guided meditations, and this is to the sounds that I create, or soundscapes that I create using sounds from stars and planets. This is me giving a guided meditation. And black tourmaline actually protects you from negative energy, but it also represents the Black body. So when you meditate with me, it is really about developing a deeper relationship to the Black body. My entire work is all about protecting, serving, and stabilizing the Black body and looking for ways for the Black body to prosper in this world. So about 8 years ago, I went back home to Detroit. I've been traveling all over the world, and I noticed that the future was being aggressively created by white hetero men. Even though Detroit is 85% black, black women are the heads of households in Detroit. And also, blackness was narrowly defined. And so this is the thing about Afrofuturism that is so wonderful, and I think Bio wonderfully illustrated about how it can create these portals of potential and possibilities. So Afrofuturism is a cultural movement. It's an arts movement. You find it in architecture and dance and visual art and literature. And it manifests using the aesthetics of science fiction and fantasy and magical realism and horror. And it looks at also futures in science, like biology and genetics. It pulls from mythologies, mostly African mythologies and legends and cosmologies. And so it's just kind of this one big soup of things to basically look at the Black experience, or just what it means to occupy a Black body in this world and imagine new futures. But I do want to pause and say that please understand that Afrofuturism is also challenging our notion of time. Time is constructed and it's linear based on a European construct. And we have we have been adhering to that, and has been causing, and it is scientifically proven, depression. It has caused so much harm to all of us, regardless of what body you occupy. So Afrofuturism definitely moves in and out of different realities and dimensions. It doesn't just go one way. It goes up, down, diagonal, back, forth, in and out. But it definitely allows for us to investigate in a deeper way, in an ancestral way, our Blackness. I ran for mayor of Detroit, and as a curator and as an artist, so my artistic practice is 4 years, as a curator over 15 years, and my expertise has always been Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism was coined in '96, and I saw it as this hobby. And then I decided through Afrotopia to start teaching people about Afrofuturism. But when I started teaching youth, I started understanding the challenges that we were facing. And this morning I did talk a little bit about those challenges. 60% of our youth are in poverty. We're facing thousands of water shutoffs, school closings, tax foreclosures. The list is very long. And after being in the social justice community and listening to not only getting a full understanding of the challenges, which most of us don't really understand within our own spaces, but also looking at the resolutions that they were trying to propose and how our city government was not listening, I decided to run for mayor. I'm a very impatient person. I do not believe that anyone should be living in poverty right now. I do not believe anyone should be in harm. There is absolutely no reason. So this is all about power dynamics. So I launched using Detroit is the Future. This is the artwork that you're going to see is by Dogon Kriga, and he's on Instagram, so please look him up if you want to look at some Afrofuturist imagery. And that's Danya Luna that you see. She said she's from Detroit, and she said she was from the planet Mars. This is my logo. I decided to use an Afrofuturist aesthetic during my campaign. It's seductive, it's beautiful, it's something different. And so as we talk about innovation, this is me innovating within a political sphere, doing something completely out of the box. I did not want to adhere too much to a lot of the traditional ways of campaigning. People don't trust politicians already, so why would I do exactly what all other politicians and candidates do? It doesn't even make sense. And the logo represents the people. That's the Afrotopia symbol in the middle. And at the bottom, that is the paradise tree, which we find all over Detroit, and the rays, or whatever you want to interpret them to be. So I was asked often, what is an Afrofuturist candidate? And I had no idea because no one had done it before. I was the first person to do it. There has been another candidate after me who did run for mayor as an Afrofuturist. But I decided to just kind of explore and experiment, and at my campaign office, I created these co-creation sessions. And that's basically gathering Detroiters together on a topic that changed every week. I went from everything from the creative economy to cryptocurrency to adult literacy, restorative justice practices. But the first one was cannabis. And the reason is because I'm a cannabis advocate. It's a social justice issue. Many black and brown bodies have been incarcerated over cannabis. And as we face legalization, this is something that we need to talk about. Also, it's going to be very, very expensive to legally have a marijuana business because of licensing and things of that sort. So it's intentionally trying to kind of shift to where the people with the capital have. Understand that this is a hustle for so many people so that they can make ends meet, pay rent, and eat, to be quite honest. And so when we're taking that out, we have to make sure that the public is educated about what's coming towards us. Just to give you an understanding of the racial disparity in the cannabis industry, there are only 5 dispensaries in this 85% black city that are owned by black people out of 180 dispensaries, just to be clear. This is what a co-creation session looked like. We always sat in a circle, and we had these conversations. And I always presented my ideas, and then I just opened it up. And it was really through these kinds of conversations that I was able to come with a plan of action. And this, I'm just showing imagery of what, different flyers that I created. And that plan of action, which I discussed a little bit earlier, was to create a universal basic income to basically not only stop the poverty cycle, but hopefully make sure that all of our residents have their needs met, and then hopefully we'll be able to start building wealth and capital. Whites are born with 16 times more wealth than blacks in America. It would take, if whites stopped accruing wealth today, it would take us 228 years to catch up. So this is, when we talk about poverty, this is beyond survival. We have to think beyond that. We want our people to really thrive. And so that gets into the principles of Afrofuturism. It wasn't until after my campaign that I could think about what were these principles that I was instituting, and what is this like common thread that we see in the cultural projection of Afrofuturism. And one of them is cooperative economics. All of you who are in business, please understand that a cooperative economic model is probably the only model that will end the poverty cycle. We have to share the wealth. Ancestral grounding, Afrofuturism is always, always digging into the past and letting it inform the present. Nnedi Okorafor, Who Fears Death? That is such one of my favorite novels. And she, yes, and she does this really beautiful way of illustrating that. Who fears death? Write it down. And co-creation, those were the co-creation sessions. Politicians must, and business owners must be able to be open with the public and co-create. Listen to what the needs are. Experimentation is absolutely necessary, and it's probably the crux of Afrofuturism. As you were talking about like blackness and how you're like trying to reach for it, this is one thing that I love about Afrofuturism. Because of the level of experimentation, blackness is hard to hold on to. And that gives us a freedom, and that is like a liberatory practice, as my friends would call it. Pleasure. I am a pleasure activist. I believe in the pleasure principle. That means every moment of every day, hopefully in this moment, should be pleasurable. So as we're designing and as we're thinking about tech and innovation, please consider, is this a pleasurable kind of innovation? Will this bring joy, delight? Will it incite playfulness? All of these things are really important to being human. We don't want to just work and get money. We want to enjoy our lives. And transformation and resilience, trust and transparency, all of these elements are super important for the Black body to thrive in the now, and that's why you find it in Afrofuturism. I want to just pause right here to understand that, yes, we center the Black body, but I definitely believe that in centering the Black body, we actually attend to the needs of everybody. Example, I co-hosted a conversation on Afrofuturism and pleasure. The audience was 80% white men. This was in Detroit. And we finally asked, why are you here? Like, why are you, what is it? And finally, this one man said, I come from a background of white supremacy. He was Catholic. He just named a super long list that he felt were limitations in his life. And he said that he thinks that Afrofuturism would be the portal that will liberate him. And I was like, yes, this is so true for everyone. Afrofuturism liberates everyone because of these wonderful principles. And because it exercises, more importantly, it exercises our imagination. We have to think beyond the current realm, the current laws, the current limitations, our structures, and institutions. They're malleable. We can change them. Humans created them. Humans can transform them and change them. And it's about time that we do it, because the current systems are only going to cause us more harm. So please contact me if you want to talk. That's Muhammad Ali fighting Superman.
At this moment, I would like to just take a pause and give all of our panelists a round of applause. I know that we're over time, well over time. We call it CP time, but as you said, time, we've all been deceived by it, so.
Yes, we can redefine it.
Don't mind us. But I know you're probably hungry as well. But so we're going to conclude here, but If anyone wants to stick around, we're probably going to allow for 3 questions before we do the official release and everyone is able to go. But if there's anyone who wants to ask any question, now is the time. We'll do 3, and then we'll wrap it up. Yes, is there a mic arranged for? Can we use this one here? Oh, there. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Nuruddin Osman. I run agriculture company in Africa. I just wanted to really make a comment and also expand some of your discussion. One side I want to just share to the architectural side. When I looked at your presentation, there are a couple of things there is a gap in your consumer segments. One, the opportunity to cater for animal, right? Second is to cater for even for plant, because we have to eat, right? So we need greenhouses design, we need the animal houses design, and last but not least, we always talk about post-harvesting laws in Africa. But what about architecture role you play there? And so I would like you to consider that, expand your consumer base. The second point what I'd like to make is also the designers, the clothes designers that your presentation. Think about the market you need to expand. One is like for example, we buy corporate clothing. So the corporate clothing is segment where we only import outside Africa. There's no few companies catering for that. So when you look at even the market, when you walk in everywhere in Africa nowadays, you see security clothing, right? There's a huge market. And this, even workshop clothing, this is market where we can't find suppliers in Africa. So those are the 2 comments I wanted to add to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Oh, I can't, the light is in my, is someone there? Okay.
Hi, my name is Jackie. I'm from Uganda. I wanted to ask about, I'm obsessed with the concept of Afrofuturism. And I wanted to ask, because of my background is in policy, I wanted to ask, what would it look like to have a policy that is pro-Afrofuturism? And how would we go about that if we were to influence and come up with policy and legislation around Afrofuturism as a concept and trying to, yeah.
Did you want to get all the questions first?
Yeah, you know what, let's bundle the questions. There you go. And I can't see that well, even with these glasses on, it's deceiving. All right, this gentleman in the front here. Or whoever.
On the other side.
Do this.
Hi. First of all, thank you for sharing with us your experience. I'm very much interested in your tequila. And
yes, where can we get this?
No, just because I'm also involved with events and promoting, and most of the drinks I deal with come from abroad. They are locally produced. And my question to you is, does your product, is it a product for Africa or is it a product for Europe to become popular in Africa? You see? Because a lot of these products, they do not promote in Africa, but they come with a promotion set from, let's say, Europe or the US, you see. So I'm just interested to know what is your thought process behind it and what's the marketing behind that.
Yes, good evening. I think I would want to ask a question to the lady who mentioned that she studied and did a number of things out of Africa. I think today it's actually an issue whereby if you get probably to be born here but raised outside of Kenya, maybe outside of Rwanda, and you go to the US or UK, why would you want to come back to Africa? Maybe, it's a question that is hitting most of young people, because you find Like in my country, everyone wants to majorly apply for a green card and go to the US. Probably people believe and think that the US is where you go there, you get a job and everything provided for you. So I probably wanted to find out, or maybe get to know, maybe what prompted you to just want to come here and chill, because I also, as a way to get a job. Sometimes you go study in Malaysia, you go study in Philippines, other countries, but they tell you, hey friend, we don't have a job for you. We consider our local. So at that options, you just have to come. But on other situations, probably find that as a young person, maybe you have an opportunity. So what prompts you to come back to Africa? Or maybe I'll prefer to work in the UN if they employ me in Geneva. Of what benefit will it be if I come back here? So maybe I thought I asked that question. The other one, I think the session is quite interesting, and I'm loving most of the ideas, and we should have this more often, yeah. So thank you.
Okay. Is that
First of all, I want to say fantastic work all of you guys are doing. I'm based in Nigeria. I work for the Corporate Council in Africa. I have a question. Every week I get calls, and I have to get on conference calls about Africa, especially as you discuss about the political, economic, and social climate. And there's something called the political economy. And each of you are doing amazing stuff. But as you know, as the risk factor kicks in, it can eliminate all of your businesses. So I want to ask, what are you all doing, especially around trying to speak with your different governments in different places, policymakers, to sort of make sure that the country, city, or wherever you are is heading the right direction, so that your growth, your stories will continue to be heard throughout generations? Thank you.
I think we got the questions, all the questions. So I guess we can. What? You see someone else? All right, one more. This is it. You gotta. One last one, and then we just have to. One last one. This gentleman here, and then we got to start answering. Do you guys remember the questions now? You're pointing them out. Y'all remember? Okay.
All right. Thank you for the amazing talk. This has been definitely one of the best talks I have been to for this entire convention. I wanted to ask you guys, do you, as creative people, do you ever go through a phase where you stop seeing the specialness of your work? I am a 3D artist, so I shared an experience with a friend of mine. He told me that, okay, let me just describe it as, let's say, the magician's curse, okay? So based on the analogy that when a magician performs, they are cursed in a way because they are the only ones in the room who cannot feel the magic because they know how the trick is done. So as a creative person, I also go through this thing where I really don't see the magic in my work. I see other people look at what I have created in a way that I really cannot understand. So I was wondering, do you guys ever go through that as well? And if you do, how do you overcome that?
All right. So I'm going to let you guys sort of cherry pick from the questions that you heard and just make sure that brevity is a factor in this, because I'm sure people want to stay to the duration of this. So we start off with you, Bio, and anyone else who wants to just sort of cherry pick a question and respond to a question that they've heard, go ahead.
The brother that cannot see the magic, what's your name again? Could you just shout it out? Melvin. Okay, so Melvin can't see the magic. And yeah, there are moments when you feel you're right there in the operating room and everyone else gets to benefit from the beauty of what you're doing. And you are cut off in some Marxist fashion from the products of your hands. But I feel that that there is a way of coming to see the world that invites us to notice that the things we tend to exteriorize as our products or objects are also emergent, and they also have effects on us, if you will. So a baker doesn't just need the dough needs the baker as well, if you will. So the binary that we have of user versus tool, like I create the phone, I create this, that's not entirely true. And so that's why we're moving away from the modern and the postmodern. We're moving away into a beautiful new paradigm. I don't want to speak of it as if it's a utopia, but it tells us that the world around us is alive. The world is alive. So I would invite you in a very practical sense to search for the shadows in the things that you do. Be willing to be surprised. My elders would say, where you should go is where there's a dead end, where there's an obstacle. Head towards that path. That's where the surprise is. So maybe you're not seeing the magic or feeling the magic because you know your work too much. And you're too acquainted with it. You know all the theories. I think you should search for the shadows, the depths, the monsters that haunt your work. I guess you'll feel the magic after that.
So I'll respond to the question of political economy. I think it's a very good observation, but I took a very different approach to the problem that you pose. I actually said, how do I spread the opportunity? So it's actually a Pan-African project. So some of the businesses that I've actually undertaken are actually invested in South Africa and some are in Lesotho. And it was a deliberate tactic because of the sometimes, bad neighborliness that happens. Why is this a Lesotho project? Why is it South African? So I demonstrated in terms of the value chain that in fact they can be able to jointly participate. And then the different business units I targeted towards different funding streams. So that meant that I wasn't beholden to any one particular nation state, which is maybe it's a tactic, but I thought it was actually quite a good thing because both countries actually benefit. On the question in terms of the marketing, thank you. So it's a Pan-African project. So we are launching in Lesotho, we're launching in South Africa. I actually did a soft launch in Times Square 3 months ago. So the intention that it's also going to be launched in New York in the next couple of months. And again, that's a way of reducing risk, but also to claim spaces at multiple locations. I liked your point about being timeless, but I also think that being Afrofuturist is also being borderless. There's no reason for us to not have multiple engagements around the world at the same time. So for me, it's not about being here or there, it's about being everywhere at the same time. And I think part of the opportunity of the fourth industrial revolution and the technology that we have right now is that we don't have to have products that penetrate the market in a linear fashion. We can actually penetrate simultaneously. Yeah.
Is there a tasting room or something?
So I'll answer the question about Afrofuturism reflected in policy. Generally speaking, because it's very difficult, policy is produced in different ways in different cities and countries. But making sure that it's human-centered, it requires a reassessment of values. So if city government, in my case, is shutting off water, then they're causing harm. That is not an effective, efficient, human-centered government. And any policy that is shutting down schools, for instance, denying children education, that is not, a good policy. So those principles, just kind of looking at the principles and reassessing the policy against those principles, I guess is a really good way of doing that. And it's basically what is going to support the Black body quite honestly, on a global scale, because we should be able to move anywhere we want in this world. I mean, that's one of the major issues with Black Americans when we discuss that we want to leave the US, but it's like, where do we go? Because we face racism in Europe as well. We face racism in South America. So, it's really thinking about, how can we make sure that these Black bodies are accruing wealth and sharing and co-creating, and what policies will allow for that to happen, what policies will allow for experimentation to happen in tech industries or in the creative sector.
Well, I think that the question around what it means to kind of move between spaces and what it means to come back to Africa was addressed to Makeda. I would like to respond to that because, you know, when I think about, and I'll also respond to the question around what it means to have that magic in the creative space. But with regard to dealing with the continent, so I'm Black American, you know, or I inhabit a Black American body. I live in the United States. I also live in Johannesburg, but I moved to Johannesburg initially for an NGO kind of, you know, situation, but ultimately what I found was opportunity. So, you know, having not come through the Ivy Leagues, having not come through, even having studied art or photography, ultimately, because I studied sociology, I found myself in Johannesburg with an incredible amount of access to genius, access to laboratories, access to infrastructure that I wouldn't have had access to in the United States or in New York, because from a cost perspective, it was just out of reach, right? So we talk about, right, like 16 times more wealth for the non-Black body in the United States, you know, like that's a real factor for a Black body in the United States. So I went to Johannesburg and I found opportunity there, and I find it very funny that for a lot of people it's kind of incongruous, or it's kind of counterintuitive that a U.S. American would go to Africa to find opportunity, but that's actually the reality. And if we don't take a pause to acknowledge that is a reality, then we're doing ourselves a tremendous disservice. With regard to the creative moment, I just want to say this, like I say to myself, I know, so I have a physiological response to my work. So if I create an image and I start to work on it, or and I start to like do post-production, and even though I have no issues with admitting that I work with a lot of people, there's something that happens physiological for me where I find myself, my heart rate goes into hyperaction. And then I ultimately know when to stop because I recognize the work. And I feel like thinking through Afrofuturism, thinking through ancestral knowledge, thinking through this memory, biological memory, I think that there's a lot that comes through in the creative process, and I think that what one has to do is allow oneself to be patient. Where are you? I can't see you. Yeah, you have to be patient with yourself. I think we're pushed into the rush of things, but I think that it's essential to be patient with your process, to submit to your process, to allow yourself to submit to your process, because there are things at work that we're not always able to grasp. And then the last thing I just want to say is I just appreciate this panel, and what I really do love about this panel is that much like my practice, I feel like many of us are in the practice of deconstruction, you know, in order to challenge the notion of architecture, and how architecture can actually kind of affect one, you know, and to think through these things, you know, in a very conscious way.
I want to reply to the question regarding the fashion. Yes, of course, there's a reality that we are living whereby in Africa we import from outside of Africa, but there's one part of Africa, even though they import much from outside of Africa, but at least what they try to do is they try to add value to what they import. The challenge, like some of us as best established designers, one thing I may say is that yes, we are looking at how we can come up with a type of clothing that will fit to the low class and middle class. But it requires such a huge investment. But if there's a way of coming up with a strategy, I think it's possible. There's one thing maybe I may say regarding to some of the West African countries where I have seen where they try to be dressed locally. The example of Ivory Coast, I lived in Senegal. In Senegal, more than like 95% people are being dressed in bubu. If they are Senegalese here, you know. Like they import the fabrics from Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia, and they do the dyeing and they do the embroidery and they do the outfit. So Senegalese are known of that. On Friday, either they are Muslim or Christian, they are all dressed in bubus, and that's why even I learned to be dressed in bubu. So I realized it was possible. It depends on every country, I would say, structure. I would say it's possible, but there's need of having that conversation. There's need for some of us to be willing to get into it by providing clothing not only for the high end, but even looking at the other class. And there are a number of countries that we can be inspired of, like India. When you look at Indians, they are really proud of being dressed with the attire, and they are locally made. So, and the way they did it, they started small, but they grow and grow. So, and it even depends on the government involvement. So some of us, we need to sort of like say it over and over. I know it will have to be a song, but it depends of how the governments of our nations are willing to be involved with us. And we need to involve other stakeholders because we can't do the work alone. So that's what I can say.
Okay, just so that I don't leave the person who asked the question hanging as to why would I want to come here when I get the question as being why would I want to be here when I could be working in the States instead, I guess. And for me, it's just emotional. Mostly, I feel a sense of belonging here. And I did in Jamaica as well. Even though I was born in the States, I always felt, I guess rightfully so, because there are sometimes effort in the States in some black communities to not feel wanted there. But I felt like I didn't really fit in, even from when I was a kid. But when I moved to Jamaica and when I came here, I felt at home in both places. And then the second thing is that I felt like I was contributing to something. And I didn't have that feeling in the States, and not saying that I could never, but in Jamaica and here, I feel as though when I'm working, I'm contributing to a bigger picture, and something that I feel proud of, and that's why.
To the gentleman that asked about the political economies, I think one of the most important things, especially when we talk politicians, if there are no numbers, it's hard for them to understand. And I've been lucky to be part of a workshop where I was in Kenya, and they told us how the relevance of the creative sector was brought up. And what happens is they measured it, and there was data. And they realized the creative sector brought in more than the mining sector. And I'm telling you, at that point, the politicians were like, okay, this is serious. We need to pay attention to it. So much so that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs now has a whole wing dedicated to the creative sector and make sure they're exporting the creative sector, the Kenyan brand outside Kenya. So that was one of the examples, I think. So once you measure it, and the creative sector, I think on the continent hasn't been measured properly. And once the data is there and we can see the influence, we can see the numbers, then the politicians will pay attention. And I also wanted to suggest something. I've been attending summits, and some of them are tech, some of them are you name it. And I always find that the creatives conversation is always on the outside. It's always at the end. It's always, even sometimes outside the venue itself. So I wanted to suggest that next time we come back for the African Creative Summit.
That's a good one.
Nice. Here, here.
I feel like I need to follow that, probably because I talked about quantifying and address two particular points. One raised about the architects to expand our scope and include animals, vegetables. I don't remember if you say vegetables or greens, something along those lines. And someone also talked about the politics, the polity economies, right? So yes, belief number 2 that I presented today was about proof of impact. We strongly believe in that. And the other thing we believe is that the architecture itself is a process, not a product. And the end result of that process is not always a building, or it's not a building for people, or for animals, or for farming. So landscapes and natural spaces, ecology, embodied energy, all of these are things that we believe in our work we need to quantify. We need to find the imprint of our work and what does that mean, and make informed decisions when we are putting up these buildings, so that every step of that architectural process, there are checks and balances that says, do we really want to do this? Is it justified? If it's not justified, should we do it? And if it's justified, what are we losing in terms of energy? Is there a way you can compensate that somewhere else? Are we influencing the biodiversity that exists around that place? Should we change a solution, et cetera, et cetera? So we believe that architecture as a process has that capacity of being able to be held accountable for the impact that we create in the world, and we see the results. I presented a very small portion of our work and very quickly, but I'll invite you to visit our website to try to see much more of the things we did. Similar to the politic economy. I think we have demonstrated, basically through our work, we've understood that not only as architects we need to do the work and show that it's possible, but we need to do research so we know what we are talking about in terms of numbers, be able to stand by it. And then third, we need to advocate for that change. So I think the fear of being in hard situation, hard conversations with politicians, people who would rather seem to be disconnected from all of these things you want to talk about, is not productive in this case, because we have to be engaged on so many fronts. And I think some other people mentioned about it, like we have to kind of like work in many places at the same time, using different technologies and different approaches to be able to affect this change we want to affect.
So, okay.
Very quickly, my brother said something about political economy, and I felt I needed to just say a word or two. I know you're smiling. I have a visceral reaction when I hear the words put together, creative sector, because it implies that what is actually happening there is that the status quo makes intelligible what we do by applying what we do to the metrics of the present. And so it's when you say creative sector, we're basically saying that your work is not valuable until it fits these standards, until it can be produced or on a mass scale or spread out. I feel that's dangerous to the radicalness we're bringing here. And to what everyone is bringing here, please, what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to invite you to is, don't fall into the trap or another box of, your work doesn't fit the creative sector. That's another way of parsing you to the side, making you relevant to something. I believe the work of a creative person today is to undercut the status quo, is to seek to redefine what it means to be creative. The person who is a goat herder in India is part of the creative sector. His work might not have brands, his work might not get on the internet, but he's doing something valuable to that economy. So I feel, my invitation here is that we learn to think about the ways we language these realities. and to actually hold space for something that wants to be born beyond those metrics. That's just what I wanted to say about it.
And I hate to do this, speak out of turn, but one little thing I want to insert is we need to think very specifically around our cultural capital and the ownership of our cultural capital, because a part of all of this in terms of how we're going to discuss the creative space and in political economies and the creative economies is we also have to think through like the relationship between our production and the consumption of our production and our capacity to participate in the economies of our production. Because like in several spaces here, we're talking about Black-owned businesses, we're talking about African-centered businesses, we're talking about the fact that the creative economy is surpassing the mineral economy or the commodities, right? So where are we in the process of sustaining these businesses and sustaining our cultural economies and thinking through, how to, not capitalize isn't the right word, but to support, right, our creative spaces and our cultural production.
So I want to wrap it up here, and I just want to just really quickly, the brother talked about the magician. I will say this one, being a magician, I will just say this one thing. As a magician, as a creator, you have a unique vantage point that allows you to see and allows you to partake in the pleasure of seeing people marvel at what they thought was impossible be made true. So remember that as a creator, that's what we do to sort of shift reality, not just in the physical realm, but also in the realm of people's minds about what it means to be Black, what it means to be African, and what it means that what your potential actually is as well. So thank you so much. To follow Philip's point, yes, I think that it would be great next year to extend this, and hopefully we may not even need to create another summit, but maybe we can make it the African Creative and Innovative Summit. It has a nice ring to it, access. See, I did the work already. I did the work. I'm creative. So thank you so much, and thank you for bearing with us and sitting through this. I hope you've taken something from this that will enhance your life and your mission in life and your projects. So thank you very much.
And I say that as if I've got a